Good evening. Oh, is this on? Yes? Great. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Jackie Keating with Dare to Care Food Bank, and I am absolutely honored to welcome you all for this conversation. In a few moments, we will watch the documentary, The Working Hungry, that follows 3 Hoosier families who are struggling with food insecurity. But first, I want to take a few moments and recognize those who have made this evening possible. First, I want to recognize Care and Richie and the incredible team at Indiana University Southeast for being our co-hosts this evening and for being our partners in feeding our neighbors. Thank you so much, Karen and team. I also want to recognize the incredible team at the Ogle Center for your hospitality, for your logistical and technical support. Thank you so much for having us in your beautiful space. I also want to recognize our amazingly talented moderator, Angie Fenton of X12 Media. We are so grateful for you for leading this conversation. We have some distinguished panelists with us tonight who are going to lead us in conversation. Karen Richie, again from IUS, Dr. Julia Valliant from Indiana University Bloomington, Emily Weikert Bryant from Feeding Indiana's Hungry, and my boss, Vincent James, President and CEO of Dare to Care Food Bank. Thank you all so much for sharing with us this evening. I also want to recognize some of my teammates. If you are an employee of Dare to Care, please raise your hand. Thank you so much to all of you for the planning and all that you did to make tonight possible. I also want to recognize some of our partners who are here. If you are a partner of Dare to Care, raise your hand. Thank you all so much. We could not do this work without you. We are so grateful that you're here tonight. I want to recognize some of our volunteers, my father-in-law over here who's snapping some photos, and his trusty assistant, my mother-in-law over here. Thank you so much for, hey, that counts. You're holding a lens, that counts. Thank you so much for your help tonight. Finally, I want to recognize our presenting sponsor this evening, New Washington State Bank. The amazing folks at New Washington State Bank have been a sponsor of Dare to Care and supporting our work in Southern Indiana for many, many years. And we are so grateful to them for supporting this event and elevating the conversation for Indiana families. It is a bit surreal for me to be standing on this stage, on this campus, introducing a documentary about this issue tonight. I spent quite a bit of time on this campus as a young girl. My mother was a full-time student here at Indiana University Southeast until I was about 4 or 5 years old. In addition to being a full-time student, my mom and dad both worked full-time jobs. Even still, their budget for groceries every week was $20. 4 decades later, there is way more month than money for far too many of our fellow Hoosiers. Today in Southern Indiana, there are 40,000 individuals who cannot always afford the food that they need to be healthy. Many of those individuals are working 1 or 2 or 3 jobs and still struggling to make ends meet. You will hear from some of those families tonight. I want to encourage all of us to join in on the conversation so that 4 decades from now, we are not having the same discussion. Again, I want to thank each of you for being here tonight. It is my absolute honor to introduce The Working Hungry.
The Working Hungry is funded by Ascension St. Vincent in these additional supporters.
We lost everything in that time frame. Lost family members because people didn't think I was doing enough.
I used to live on a farm, and I used to come here and get groceries because I needed the help.
It's worse now than it's ever been. To keep going forward. Don't give up, no matter what. You can't give up. If you're working, keep working. Don't quit. Don't stop.
Everybody wants to be able to feed their kids without having to ask for help.
In Indiana, the percentage of children going hungry has long been worse than the national average, about 15% statewide. Especially now, with a renewed national focus on hunger, you'll hear many statistics on families and children unable to access quality, nutritional food. In Indiana, the rate of childhood hunger varies from county to county, ranging from 1 in 6 children all the way to 1 in 4, all numbers that are far too high. Looking at it another way, the Indiana Youth Institute's annual Kids Count report asks parents about their ability to feed their children. In 2022, 1/3 of families reported that food costs keep their kids from eating enough. Contrary to what you might think, most of these children are not homeless or neglected. They actually live in working families and have parents who are employed but still struggle to put nutritious food on the table.
These are the kids next to my kids in classrooms. This is the person on the soccer team that I sit next to their parents and have no clue that they struggle every week.
There are pockets of hunger throughout the entire state, not just in urban or rural areas. And I think that that would be one of the biggest fallacies that needs to be addressed, that hunger only exists in certain areas in the state. Hunger does not look alike for every child.
The need for food assistance is being addressed by food pantries, by charities like churches, and by government programs like school meals and SNAP, which provides 85% of the food. But food insecurity and hunger still reach deep into our Hoosier communities, into the lives of families you may know. It is all around us, often hidden and often where you least expect to find it. Families, especially those working hard to create the most normal life they can for their kids, don't want their neighbors to know how they struggle to keep food on the table. Yet it's a crisis that can impact every aspect of a child's life, now and far into the future. That's because poor nutrition in childhood creates poor outcomes for children and young people both in the short and long term.
So I think that it's very important that people understand that nutrition is a part of health. And so if you aren't able to get the foods that you need to remain healthy, it's very difficult to control your blood pressure or your blood sugar if you aren't eating the proper foods.
And that impacts not only their physical health, but also their mental health. With school-age children who are hungry, it can impact their ability to learn. Something as simple as not having the energy to play. It can affect all your organ systems.
Not having access to healthy food on a regular basis has a ripple effect across a child's life. Former Indianapolis Public Safety Director Troy Riggs knows from research, data, and what he's seen on the streets how a lack of food undermines children's success.
If a child shows up to school on Monday and they're hungry, they're not focused on schoolwork. They're focused on food. What about those families that have no idea when their next meal is going to be, how they're going to provide for their family member, their loved one? That will give you a sense of desperation that people are going through.
According to the USDA, about 700,000 Hoosiers are what is known as food insecure. This hunger ranges across Indiana from border to border and affects families with children at a greater percentage. But why, at a time when unemployment is remarkably low and food is plentiful, are so many Hoosier children facing the painful reality of hunger?
We have a world now that we have 2 income earners in a home that possibly both have 2 jobs. They might be an Uber driver, and people are just trying to make ends meet. And it's just not happening today. And it's really the hidden poverty of our time, the working poor.
The conversation is always about rent. and no one wants to be homeless. And so patients will work that extra job or take an extra shift to be able to make sure that they can keep a roof over their head. And then I think that other things like food and other sustenance are placed, secondary or sometimes even tertiary because no one wants to be out on the street.
I'm so disappointed that in the richest, most powerful country in the world, that we have kids that go to bed hungry. Possibly 1 in 5 kids in the state of Indiana go to bed hungry.
The USDA defines food security as access by all people at all times to enough food for an active, healthy life. U.S. Health and Human Services says food insecurity disproportionately impacts communities of color, people living in rural areas, people with disabilities, older adults, LGBTQ+ individuals, military families, and veterans. This is playing out right here at home in Indiana. Jim Morris is an executive with the Pacers basketball organization now, but for several years he was executive director of the World Food Program, the food assistance arm of the United Nations.
A child to be hungry is wrong, and it compromises the child's life from the very beginning. The child has no chance to be successful in school. Hunger is the single greatest health issue in the world.
Everybody wants to be able to feed their kids without having to ask for help. And especially parents that are working should be able to put food on their table. It shouldn't be so prohibitively expensive to support your family if you're working.
When you think of poverty in America, what image comes to mind? Did you know that 85% of poor people live outside of high poverty neighborhoods, and that 85% of counties with persistent poverty are rural counties? Hunger doesn't know city boundaries. It is everywhere in Indiana. We're going to meet 3 Hoosier families, 3 working families trying to do everything right, but still fighting an uphill battle to keep their children fed. You should know you won't actually see very many children because the stigma of hunger is still very powerful.
Looking back on life and the things I experienced here is things I don't want my children to experience. And so everything that I do now is to try to help build them a brighter future and to give them more of an opportunity to be successful in life.
Lamont Hollins grew up on the Near East Side of Indianapolis in a single-parent home. When his mother was killed outside their apartment, young Lamont went to live with his grandmother, a woman who epitomized the value of hard work and community to him. Lamont and his wife have always worked until Lamont suffered a debilitating shoulder injury while employed by a shipping company. Even then, Lamont found joy in mentoring young people and in feeding others. It was another value passed on by his grandmother.
I had to find something that I could do, and that was something we started building off of. So when I come back from college, I lived here with my grandmother. By far the favorite day of the week was Sundays, because you always knew that we were going to have a meal, a big meal. And so I grew fond of barbecuing, and we grilled all the time, nonstop. It could be 3 o'clock in the morning when we was firing up the grill.
Over years of working to build a barbecue business and simultaneously working around the legal issues of his injury, the Hollins family, including 4 sons, has faced successes and setbacks.
I had multiple surgeries in between there trying to figure out what was going on. The disability process within itself was a whole nother arena. The attitude was, you keep working until you die.
Still, the Hollinses kept cooking. An arrangement to sell their custom sauces didn't pan out. An East Side restaurant let them barbecue in an adjacent parking lot until local ordinances on commercial cooking operations priced them out of business.
So on the weekends, we would set up a tent. So it'd be me, my wife, and the boys.
The family ultimately moved out of Indianapolis to a suburb to be closer to the resources that could assist them and their children. Lamont is making the most of his time finishing his college degree while continuing to work in grocery delivery. His wife continues to work as well, and they still cater events for fans of their food. But as with many families struggling to keep the bills paid, every little setback, a car problem, an illness, keeps them from taking the next step towards success. Still, these parents are determined that they will leave their kids a better legacy than they had.
We continue to work hard every day and crush down the roadblocks in front of us and opening up the path for them.
Hello. Hello. And this in here's our pig ride, our hog roast we're going to have, our silent auction, and we've got a motorcycle ride, car show, a whole bunch of good stuff in there. Yeah.
Carolyn Begley embodies the phrase, starting over. From the rural community of Jennings County in southeastern Indiana, Carolyn suffered a severe brain trauma in her 20s and has spent the intervening years relearning everything.
I'd had brain surgery, and I didn't know anything about anything. I didn't know my colors. I had to relearn all my shapes, my signs, and I've just learned how to read.
Carolyn now works in the very food pantry that once helped her. She lives in what is termed a complex household, a situation in which more generations and family members live together because of strained financial circumstances. A widow, she now lives with her sister while helping raise her teenaged grandson.
I used to live on a farm, and I used to come here and get groceries.
Now Carolyn works at the Good Samaritan Food Pantry, providing the services she needed then and still needs now. But she's making her way through a training program.
It's like I was on disability when I first came here. We retrain under the National ABLE program. I relearn things. It's like I'm learning shipping and handling right now. The end of December of 2023 will be my end of my 4 years. And then I will be able to go on to the community.
Financial security is still distant for Carolyn. She and her grandson had to pool their money for a repair on the car she uses to get them both to work. She's already been offered retail jobs, but remains committed to finishing her training program.
When I first came here, I couldn't add, I couldn't spell, I couldn't use a calculator. I could not make a decision of any kind on my own. This is my purpose. Helping others and the pantry is my purpose is in life. God gave me a reason to live, a reason to help others, a reason to have to think. And these people here have helped me.
Every morning I get up about 5 o'clock and, Monday through Friday, and we just got to keep our head, if we can just keep it above water, I'm okay. So I can survive, I have to. I have no choice. And I think, that has a lot to do with that, has a lot to do with being in the service, for all those years, having to get by. Oh, I can roll it up.
Robert Miles did tours of duty in Bosnia and Afghanistan. He remains grateful for his ability to serve his country and has always found a sense of attainment in working. His family moved from their home in southern Indiana to Hamilton County because they believed the schools in Carmel would be a better fit for their son's special education needs. He has struggled for years to acquire a job that will allow them to find comfortable living conditions.
That's why it's difficult here for me to go from job to job, because I never felt stable, or I didn't have that feeling of accomplishment that I did when I was in service. I felt like I was bulletproof. I felt like I was a superhero. When you put the uniform on, it just makes you feel like you're wearing armor. Like nothing can hurt you, nothing can bother you.
After a lengthy and anxious application process, Robert was able to get a position he was hoping for at the Veterans Administration Hospital in Indianapolis. It is full-time work, and he finds it very fulfilling.
Once you work at the VA, your job, your service never stops. You continue that, and it just makes me feel good. So this is where I park every day. Go in here, I'll get my mask on, and then get my bag of lunch together, and this is it.
Unfortunately, the Miles continue to struggle to find housing in their chosen community. Robert's wife homeschools their son while the couple continues to apply for rental houses. At the time we spoke to them, they were living in a hotel and being provided food through an agency. Rising home costs and technology issues many of us take for granted can impede families like theirs trying to take the next step up toward financial independence.
Well, it's very complicated, actually. When you fill it out, they require you to submit and upload pay stubs, bank statements possibly. They want your ID. Everything is online. You put your credit card in to pay the fees. You know, who knows, that could be your last money that you have, and you're giving it to someone else when it could feed your family.
If you're living in poverty, you're likely to be moving around a lot. You're likely to be evicted or staying on your sister's couch for a while, or trying to move into a safer neighborhood. And so all that moving can separate you from your important pieces of paper. And then getting copies of things actually costs money, which we don't always think about. So all those little things can be barriers that we don't think about in terms of accessing food.
Christine Garner is the executive director of the Marshall County Neighborhood Center in Plymouth, Indiana. She's been witness to the same problems and frustrations for her entire life.
I was born and raised in Plymouth. As a young girl, I remember very vivid memories of my parents' Sunday school class providing Christmas for families in our community. And I can remember walking into homes that had dirt floors and just realizing this happens in my hometown. Like, it's just, that was a memory that I can't ever shake. We just miss that rural image of families who are trying really hard and kids are left alone to fend for themselves, or they just can't make their ends meet in a family and there's very limited supply of food in their house.
The Marshall County Neighborhood Center isn't the only food pantry in Plymouth and the surrounding area, but it offers a wide range of services. Christine sees how every little setback, from transportation to paperwork, combines to create a massive barrier to families just trying to get by.
This is where I wish I could help people connect all these little dots. For example, a lot of factories. We have a lot of factories. A lot of our middle-income families are employed through a factory. They have a point system. So if you miss work and you have 10 points now because 2 points for missing work, 1.5 points for being late one day or having to leave early or half a day, at 10 points you lose your job. Are they gonna have to be home sometimes because their child is sick? And how do we make that okay? Not every family here has a grandma and an aunt or an uncle or a sibling who can say, well, I'll come stay with your kid. They shouldn't be going to work if they're sick. They should be allowed to stay home. They should be allowed to take their child to a doctor.
Pastor John Barker of Garrard Chapel in Bowling Green, Indiana, sees the working poor crisis play out at his church's food pantry month after month. The pantry is open 8 days a month and serves clients from up to 15 surrounding counties.
We try to provide everything for the family, from the seniors all the way to the youngest. And that's one reason we're open on Wednesday, and then we're open 2 nights a week, second and third, and the second and the fourth Thursday for those parents that work, because just because you work and make $10 or $12 an hour don't mean you support a family of 2 or 3, all right? Especially with the cost and the drama that's going on in most of their lives today.
Barker is a military veteran who will tell you his specialties are logistics and loving the people who come to his church and pantry. Important characteristics when upwards of 250 families come for food in a single day.
I see stress in the parents, I see stress in the grandparents. I want to be healthy, I want to be happy. Those things food can give you, but it's just part of the formula.
One important barrier that we find with our families who are struggling to feed their children is pride. Many do not want to admit that they need the assistance.
The first time I came in to get food here, I felt like the lowest of the lowest. but I felt like, man, this is really hitting the bottom. This is really low. And I felt really, really bad.
Well, what we have found through the pandemic, that a lot of us are a paycheck away from poverty, homelessness, and it's not just that certain section of people that we used to stereotype.
Like how can you be proud if you're in this position, you know?
If you're working full-time, you should be able to meet your needs. You should be able to pay your rent. You should be able to put food on the table. You should be able to pay for basic things like health care. And if you're working full-time or even working 2 or 3 jobs and still not able to do that, there's a problem with what we're paying people in this country.
In 2022, decades of public policy support, much of it through tax credits at the federal level, have finally narrowed the national poverty gap. But when it comes to keeping children fed, that gap is not closed.
There are lots and lots of programs that help provide food to people, but if they don't know where those programs are, how to access them, they don't have the time or the ability to get to those places, they're still not getting the food that they need.
Families know the challenge of raising children, even under the best of circumstances. Now, imagine being a single parent or even a household of 2 or more working adults, holding down between 3 and 4 jobs to make ends meet, keep your children housed and fed with some kind of food you can afford, then fighting to produce paperwork and manage online forms with little sleep. What is the next step to reducing the barriers working families face in trying to achieve a strong, healthy, and consistent diet? Leading Indiana employers increasingly believe the answer is jobs with the wages and benefits needed to support stable and productive lives. In Indiana's economy, a sustainable wage is at least $18 an hour with health benefits. Cook Medical and Cook Group are major international manufacturers based in Indiana. They are working with Goodwill of Central and Southern Indiana to help change both the wage and food access narrative in an Indianapolis neighborhood. It was an eye-opening experience for Cook President Pete Yonkman.
When we think about insufficiency of food or food access, quite honestly, this is not an issue I knew a whole lot about. Our first focus was on providing a manufacturing opportunity, providing jobs opportunity, partnering with Goodwill to provide, wraparound services like life coaches and transportation, childcare, all those things that we thought would be necessities for being successful at work. So if you're at home and you can't reliably feed your kids breakfast, or you don't have access to food, how do you expect somebody to show up for work and be focused on quality? All the things that we want are our employees. They want them to be engaged and thinking about the quality of the products, particularly in a field like ours where we're making medical devices.
Now, not only does the neighborhood have reliable, wage-earning jobs in the partnership between Cook Medical and Goodwill, the literal front yard of the facility will boast a new partnership, one that brings a new local, affordable grocery store operated by 2 young local entrepreneurs. Unhealthy convenience store food will no longer have to be the first option and sometimes the only option for workers or neighbors.
They're worrying about those things, then they can't think about and be engaged in the work that we're doing, particularly in a highly safety-sensitive work environment.
Kirsten Janik is the Chief Talent Officer for Heritage Construction Materials. The company's workers are most obvious in road construction zones around the state, in bright vests and hard hats, placing orange barrels and repairing roadways. Dangerous work that requires sharp focus.
We believe a sustainable business model is not only one that we care about employees, but one where we can manage turnover. So from a sustainability perspective for our business, it's important that we're meeting those basic needs, we're paying a living wage, and that employees can show up feeling like they can be engaged and that they don't need to be out looking for something else to meet those basic needs.
Heritage Construction Materials and more than 60 other Indianapolis employers are part of the growing Good Wages Initiative.
The Good Wages Initiative certifies, celebrates, and showcases Marion County employers who provide full-time employees a wage of at least $18 an hour and access to health insurance benefits. More food pantries will not solve the problem of hungry children in working families. They need systemic responses like the Good Wages Initiative.
I think as employers, we really have to step up, and they have the least amount of barriers and stressors in their way to do that. One of those being food insecurity. And it's a community issue, and we have to be good stewards of the community.
The Indiana Community Action Poverty Institute has new data on working Hoosiers. The Institute found that of the 20 most common occupations in Indiana, 12 pay a median hourly wage less than $18. 9 of them are actually under $15 an hour. For example, there are nearly 100,000 people employed in Indiana as fast food counter workers. There are over 92,000 freight handlers, jobs we called essential during the pandemic.
Poverty is not a choice. Poverty is a circumstance people find themselves in. Most of them are working. And if we aren't paying people enough money to support themselves, we need to be thinking about whether or not that's a system that's fair.
If you've got 1 in 4 kids who aren't able to be secure in where they're getting their next meal, that's a crisis that we need to be thinking about. We can't be successful as a state. Talk a lot about workforce development, talk a lot about opportunities. If you've got 1 in 4 kids who are struggling, it's going to be a very hard road.
Research shows that government, churches, and charities respond in good, real-time ways to keep families fed. But ending hunger for good will require a deeper commitment.
I do not want my neighbors to be hungry. I do not want a single child, for whatever reason, to be hungry. And we have the wherewithal of finances, commodities, programs, passion, commitment to see that the people who are, for whatever reason, often not of their own making, are helped and supported, encouraged. That's the way it needs to be.
In order for the economy to turn around, and in order for people to get back to normal, they have to speak up. They have a voice to use. I fought for that voice. They should use it.
Almost every one of them say, I'm doing it for my kids, right? I want them to see the benefit of what this is. I want to improve their life. I want them to see the value of work. So I see it as not just a way to change what this person's life is and to be able to make a difference there, but you're making a generational difference.
If we do make it, or when we do make it, is more the question. We are going to be able to put more of a imprint on our community and being able to bring meaningful jobs that changes people's lives.
Right now I'm drowning, and without my family, I don't know where I would be right now. I work hard. Just give me something. Give me some hope, so I can keep moving forward.
The Working Hungry is funded by Ascension St. Vincent in these additional supporters.
As our panel makes their way to their seats, again, I'm Angie Fenton. And I'll share as we're going through the moderation, but I grew up in rural Michigan, population 6,000, village of Holly, and we would have been considered the working poor. My mom had a full-time job as a nurse raising 5 kids. My dad left when I was 6, and she didn't have child support to rely on. I remember taking brown paper bags with sandwiches that consisted of bread, the bologna with the red ring around it, the cheapest bologna, and if we were lucky, an apple, and taking that to school, and no one knew. During the summers, if we had good enough weather, because we had land and that was basically what we had, we gardened. My sisters and I, we gardened all summer long, and so then we would can and freeze what we were able to, and that's what we ate off of. So I recognize myself, my upbringing in this. I'm going to ask that our panel, starting here down at the end, introduce yourselves first, and then we'll begin with questions.
Hi, everyone. I'm Julia Valliant. I'm from up at Indiana University in Bloomington. I'm so honored and glad to be here with you tonight, to have just seen this beautiful film, and to be with this group of learned people. I'm a researcher. We have a food systems research group up at IU in Bloomington, and we work on health and food and farming and questions of policy.
Hello, I'm Karen Richie, and I work here at IU Southeast, and I support our students and their families on campus through the Southeast Pantry. I guess that's all I need to say.
I'm Emily Weikert Bryant. I'm the Executive Director of Feeding Indiana's Hunger, which is the state association of Feeding America affiliate food banks, including Dare to Care. I live in Indianapolis, but I'm originally from Southwest Indiana, so it's nice to be back south of US 40.
Hello, my name is Vincent James. I'm the president and CEO of Dare to Care Food Bank, and I'm really excited about being here today, and I really appreciate the opportunity to be able to share some of my experiences and being in community. And prior to being at Dare to Care, I was the chief of community building for Louisville Metro government, where I had the opportunity to serve 6 government agencies. And so I got an opportunity to see both the inside and outside of how people are really struggling every day. And so to be able to be here, to have an honest conversation about solutions and what we could do in moving forward and eradicating hunger, I'm excited to be here.
Before we begin the question, just by a show of hands, how many of you were surprised to learn that Indiana was #1 for food insecurity? I knew we were up there, but I had no idea until delving further into what I was asked to do. Vincent, I'd like to start with you, and then we'll go down the road. Those of us who care about this issue, we throw around the terms hunger and food insecurity and somewhat interchangeably, but they truly mean different things. How would you speak to that?
I would say, all of us experience hunger. I mean, we will go for some time where we may not eat all day or a half a day, and we've experienced temporary hunger. But food insecurity is where you don't have access to fresh and healthy food that will sustain a high quality of life and to be able to have positive health outcomes. And so when you think about a person who's experiencing food insecurity, they don't know where their next meal is going to come from. They may be hungry, but at the same time, they can't do anything about their condition. Where we can, many of us have the afforded opportunity to be able to maybe go temporarily hungry, but we know later that evening we can get some access, we have access to food. And so that's how I see this to distinguish the two.
Yeah, I would echo what Vincent said. It's really a matter of, it's a sense of security, right? It's whether you know you have access and you can afford it and you can get to what you need, or you don't have that sense of security. Living with poverty, living with all of the other things that come along with it, hunger is really a symptom of that, but it means that your whole life is filled with insecurity, whether it's food, whether it's housing, whether it's transportation, whether it's any number of things. And so this is a piece of that, but it's looking at, and these families exemplified it well, when you don't know. It adds, layers of uncertainty to your life. The uncertainty impacts your health, it impacts your well-being, and it impacts your whole family and your community.
I mean, this is brilliant, and all these things that we're seeing, and I think too that, we don't know who is food insecure. And a lot of people are not sharing information with us about their food insecurities or other insecurities that they're experiencing. But we may see this in a lot of different ways. Skipping meals, popping up on our campus, popping up at events that offer food, whether it's of interest to them or not. Some of our students may not afford textbooks so that they can afford food. They may also have a lot of difficulties being able to navigate day to day because of the concentration, the focus, the skills that we might see. So there's a lot of different ways, and we don't know unless we have those experiences kind of brought forward and encouraged to reduce all the stigma associated with it. And hunger is not something that is apparent to everybody either. So that's an extreme version of what food insecurity can be, and it can be on that spectrum to kind of leading to the further end of food insecurities.
Yeah, and thinking about food and hunger around the world, the internationally agreed upon definitions, hunger turns on physical discomfort or pain that arises from not having enough to eat. And then their definition of food insecurity turns on that uncertainty that everyone's been talking about. You're uncertain of your access to food, and you're uncertain if you're going to need to compromise on the quality or quantity of food that you have coming up. Another interesting twist on how we think about food insecurity is that the U.S. Department of Agriculture, which is our body of government that really tracks and pays the most attention to food insecurity, they're using a new term called nutrition security or nutrition insecurity, and that reflects not only access to sufficient energy from food, but access to all of the essential nutrients that we need to be in optimally good health. And I think their definition means being able to do that without needing to turn towards the charity or emergency sources of food that we saw depicted in the film and that you all are leading. I think that the USDA definition includes that. And our research group has done a fair amount of research learning from older adults or seniors or elders who are navigating food insecurity. And for them, it's fascinating because they reflect on how our ideas about hunger and food insecurity have changed a lot from the time that they were children, as the food system has really changed. So these things look different than they looked to them when they were children, but they're still here. They're just here in an unprecedented form that we're trying to figure out how to navigate and care for, which is what brings us all here tonight.
Absolutely. We hear about working families, and we hear a lot, I think, especially today, if people just go to work, you'd be able to feed your families, and we know that that is not true. But why is that? Why do we have working families that we just saw right there who still don't have the means to afford something that is, imperative and vital, such as food? Vincent.
The idea of someone going to work every day, but yet still not having enough resources at the end of the week when they get paid or end of the month when they get paid to take care of their families with food is just really unacceptable in the wealthiest country in the world. We have all the food in the world that we need, but the simple issue is that it's not about enough food. It's the systems and policies that continually impact individuals who don't have access to food and working every day. And one of the things that is challenging that I saw even at Dare to Care, when I first came into the organization, I began to do an assessment and said we need to really look at how we're paying our employees, because the last thing that I wanted to have happen is that we had employees standing in the same lines that they were serving in. So we did a compensation study. We wanted to make sure that all of our employees was earning a living wage. And when we did the compensation study, we realized that we were not even in the 25th percentile among nonprofits. But the good news is that the board saw that as we shared that information and said we want to bring everyone up to the 50th percentile, which enabled some of our employees, the frontline workers, who were literally working 2 and 3 jobs, to make ends meet, and ends never meet because they're ends. And so we provided for them the opportunity to have a $15,000 to $20,000 raise in one day. That's life-changing. That was amazing. Because we saw the need of people working and not having enough. We didn't want that to happen. So it first starts internally. But then we have to address those policies in terms that continue to oppress people and keep people down, such as having a living wage. Every person in America deserves the right to have a living wage, to be able to take care of their families. And then there's several other things that we could talk about that needs to be addressed, both from an individual perspective as well as looking at it from a policy perspective.
Yeah, and where I fit into this is a lot of the policy piece. So, we have 11 member food banks that collectively serve all 92 counties across the state. So, each food bank is doing their own piece of the work. If you've seen one food bank, you've seen one food bank. So if you've been to Dare to Care, I would encourage you to visit another one too, just to see what's different, what's the same. But the food that our members distribute, that's the charitable sector. Some of that's coming from the USDA. Most of it is donated. A lot of it is purchased at this point. And for every one meal that the charitable sector is providing through the Feeding America Network, the SNAP program provides 9. It's an economy of scale. And it also tells you exactly how much is being pumped into families to try to help them get by. And so, we saw during the pandemic and we've seen after the pandemic, our unemployment numbers are really great in Indiana. So people are working. They're working a lot. And they're still not getting by because as we've seen, over the course of the last 12 months, the SNAP enrollment numbers have been pretty stable, slowly coming down, which means people are slowly having more income. But the lines at the food banks and the pantries they work with continue to get longer. And it's a variety of things. It could be that one medical incident. It could be a loss of a job. It could be that cushion that they had is gone. And that's something that we continue to see on a daily basis across the state because the resources going into that household aren't enough to sustain them. So there's a lot of larger conversations to be had, but that kind of gives you the baseline of what's going on right now.
I mean, food security is an issue of a larger issue of poverty, right? That's a societal illness that's affecting our communities across the nation, across the world, right? So poverty is this ongoing thing, and we're talking about two different senses of poverty too. So we have a generational poverty where at least 2 generations have been born into poverty, and then we have situational poverty. And these are some of the things that I think we see a lot more of, especially post-COVID, where we had stimulus checks coming in, and then we were living and supporting ourselves in some of those ways with the stimulus checks, and now we don't have those added systems supporting us along the way. So even that removal of something that helps support and thrive our economy for a hiccup of a second is now impacting a lot more people along the way. So it's now leading more to this situational poverty that we see. We see a lot of it, again, on our college campuses too, when students coming in, a car repair, some of the things that Emily was just saying, like even a car repair, a medical bill, a missed class that leads to a failure in a class, like all of those can lead to more situational issues that are going to influence food insecurity in our communities, on our campuses, and nationwide.
Mm-hmm. And nationally, wages have been stagnating in contrast to the cost of everything going up, but wages are not going up as much as costs are. And as a country, we invest in ourselves less than other countries do. And so we don't invest in public transportation very much, and which means that every household needs to have a working vehicle in good condition, insured ideally, and with a tank of gas. We have to spend money, keeping our own bodies and soul together in ways that other governments and societies invest in their people. We have to pay through the nose for childcare. People get very little paternal and maternity leave when they have a child. It's just like everybody's just kind of like clutching their way through, and in the meantime, working 2 and 3 jobs like y'all are talking about, and really struggling. And what would it look like if we invested in ourselves as a people more, as a nation?
Julia, we're going to start down at the end with you. To hear, again, Indiana ranking higher than the national average in child food insecurity is beyond alarming. We learned and saw that obviously there's a short-term effect. If a kid is worried about hunger, they're going to have a more difficult time focusing on school. But what are some of these long-term effects on children who eventually become adults? And how can we, and when I say we, all of us, how can we advocate on behalf of those youth?
Oh my gosh, bless their hearts. Think about the stress that their families are in trying to navigate this. So stress goes right there together with food insecurity, and so do all the very burdensome, very expensive chronic diseases that are rising and getting more expensive. Those coexist with food insecurity because you can be undernourished and, for example, have type 2 diabetes or obesity at the same time, to give two of the most known examples. Another thing that my colleagues in our research group point out is that Indiana is a place where plants love to grow. We are very strong agriculturally. We're ranked 9th, I think, in agriculture production nationally. And yet, the more agricultural the county in Indiana, the more food insecurity you see in that county. In the film, there was somebody who lived on a farm and needed to go to the food pantry because we have invested very well in our big commodity agricultural systems, and now an investment we need to make in our children and their parents is in rebuilding our local and regional food systems and all the food we're able to grow so well in this state. Karen, you want to go next?
So in addition to Julia, like pointing out the medical issues and the mental health issues and the behavioral health issues that align with it, we're also seeing higher rates of obesity, and because we're choosing lower nutrition foods because they're less expensive in a lot of situations. There's a matter of convenience and there's a matter of cost. And so lower nutritious foods are quicker access and they're cheaper and they're more affordable. So there's a lot of things that we're seeing with higher fat and less access to fresh, nutritious foods that are able to maintain some good health for the whole body, mind, and soul. So we're seeing a lot of that impacting it. In addition, we also see that generational poverty that continues. So children who are born in poverty, who are not given that skill set and those access points, may continue that poverty into adulthood, into later ages, and maybe even into their own children and their next generation that follows.
Yeah, one of the things that we see from a policy perspective, and I always lean that way because I don't work for an organization that has direct clients. You know, Vincent can speak to what they see from their clients. I can tell you from what we see in policy, what we see in trends. And some of the things that when you're looking at the programs that serve folks who are having all of these issues, whether it be a healthcare program or a housing program or transportation, many places have been successful when you make sure that those different aspects are communicating. And that can be as simple as when folks go to the pantry, someone gives them a brochure about the SNAP program, right? That's easy, we do that. How do we make those touch points more turnkey? So one of the things that state agencies do, and the federal government has talked about this a lot, particularly coming out of the White House Conference on Hunger that happened in September, is how do we make sure the federal agencies are talking to each other just data-wise? So if you're enrolled in Medicaid, it means you are low income and you have health issues, right? If you're on Medicaid, are they automatically sending you information about the SNAP program, about WIC if you have small children, about free and reduced lunch? Are we doing those data matches to make sure that if you're getting to one point, are you getting to the other? Because having access to nutrition isn't going to solve that household's problem if they can't drive to get it, if they don't feel well enough that it's going to make any difference, right? So from a policy standpoint, it's how do we make sure that all of those aspects that are being touched when you are food insecure are working behind the scenes to provide sort of a continuum of care again, government is not the only solution to this, but it's the immediate one that families need when they're having that crisis point. How do we make sure those things are happening?
You know, Dare to Care started in 1969 as a result of a tragic incident that happened in our community. A young boy by the name of Bobby Ellis, who was attending school in the Jefferson County Public School System, died of malnutrition on Thanksgiving Eve. And he had 4 other siblings and 4 sisters. And just recently we had an opportunity to talk with his sister some 50 years later. And she shared with me that if somebody would have just checked in on them, if a neighbor would have checked in, that their story could have been different. And when I think about that, and I think about what she shared with me about her siblings who struggled with mental challenges as a result of malnutrition. In the wealthiest country in the world, again, you had someone to die of malnutrition. And so the impact is not just in the immediate situation that they're in, but it's long-term in terms of health outcomes, diseases which we know of heart diseases, high blood pressure, hypertension. All of those types of things can be prevented through food, but it's the quality of food. And I think that's where one of the things that we as good neighbors have an opportunity to simply just check on our neighbors. You know, we truly are our brothers and sisters keeper. And that's one way that we can do it. But also, you can also think about ways in which you can advocate for your neighbor who is in need. And teaching each other in terms of better ways in which we can reach our elected officials to ensure of things like the farm bill that's coming about, that the right policies are in place to help individual families to be able to live a quality of life that they deserve in our country.
Absolutely, and I think this next question is very appropriate then. I certainly came from a family like this. A lot of people don't want others to know that they're experiencing food insecurity. I remember when people checked in and my mom said we were fine. We weren't fine. If people don't know, they can't help. So how do we remove that stigma that's surrounding the need for food assistance? Emily?
So this is going to date me. I've been around the network a little bit, and I think there's maybe one other staffer in the room who may remember this. But more than a decade ago, Feeding America had a fantastic ad campaign that took actors that you would recognize. It was Taye Diggs and Ben Affleck and Matt Damon and all these people that you would know. And it had them play a role of someone in the community who needed help. And they would, they went through their lines, they acted it all out, and then they turned to the actual person and said, how did I do? And some of them gave them a hard time. It was designed to be somewhat humorous, but it was very to the point where, one of the characters was saying, we were doing all right, but we took in my brother's